Can you guys hear me? Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. I think I have to do this for it to work properly. Anyway, good afternoon. My name is Ngosi. You can't hear me? Maybe the volume is a bit low. Okay. Is that better? Okay. Sorry. Let me not touch the thing, maybe. Okay. Maybe let me just speak a bit louder. As I was saying, my name is Ngosi. I am the Managing Director at Frontline Africa Advisory. Just came up quickly to apologize that we are starting a bit late. We are going to start in the next 3 minutes or so. So please don't keep looking at your clocks and thinking, Eberton, what's going on in this room? Why have we been left alone? One of our speakers seems to be slightly delayed, so we did not want to just jump into the program and start it and then have difficulties in terms of reversing things and what have you. Mr. Skenjana here, I'm going to hand over to his very capable hands. I see he's looking at me like I'm doing his job. So let me hand over to him, and thank you all for coming.
Not yet. No, I just wanted to, good afternoon. While we are just getting ready to get going, if you do want to do just one more round of snacks and drinks and coffees, maybe now is a good opportunity for us to quickly just grab the last round of snacks before we get going. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen who are outside as well, if we can, in the next 10 seconds, please sit. We will start with a video, and then once the video is done, and then I will officially welcome you and we'll get the program going. And so while everyone just keeps coming in, I think we can get going with the video.
Frontline Africa Advisory is more than Frontline Africa Advisory is more than just a consultancy. We are a partner in navigating the complexities of South Africa's policy and political landscapes. Our approach is straightforward. We cut through the noise to deliver clear, actionable insights and strategies that align closely with our clients' goals. Integrity is at our core as we engage with honesty, ensuring that our advice and solutions are both practical and ethical. Our commitment to transparency means we communicate openly, providing clients with the insights they need to make informed decisions. With expertise in public policy, regulatory affairs, strategic advisory, and government relations, we simplify complex issues and develop coherent solutions. From multinational corporations to government bodies, our clients trust us to navigate South Africa's dynamic environment and drive sustainable impact. Our team is composed of seasoned professionals who bring a wealth of knowledge and deep understanding of South Africa's political and business landscape. Frontline Africa Advisory, your partner in strategic growth across South Africa.
Thank you. Welcome to every one of you in the room to the symposium. National dialogue, I think, is at an interesting turning point in South Africa, and I think it's settings and sittings like these that I think give us new opportunities to re-energize what national dialogue actually means, and also some reflections on how far we've come and some of the things that have worked and some of the things that have not worked. But before I continue, it only makes sense that I introduce myself as your MC for today. I will also be looking after the panel discussion. Igama lam ndinguswiso Skhenjana usibalukhulu sochenga usibheka amadonelo mabonela empunzini ukatuza sathi katu. It's important that I introduce myself that way, even in the conversation we are having today, because it often says I stand as one, but I come as 10,000. And I think it's critical in the context of NEDLAC and our discussions around that, what that 10,000 looks like. And certainly I think ensuring that we institutionalize meaningfully around that 10,000 and ensuring that even when we do stand as one, we really do represent the voice of many. Our program today is going to look the following way. We're going to have Mr. Thembikhisi Gqoyi to come through and do an opening, and then we'll have a couple of remarks, and then Dr. Ongama Mtimka is also then going to share some of the work that they've been doing around the space. And then we're going to get into a panel discussion, and we've got some strong industry leaders and industry voices to really bring meat into that discussion. And of course, we're going to open into a Q&A. But before we go there, I think it's quite important, and I'm just going to take my liberties really. I think taking a step or many steps down many memory lanes as we think about talking about NEDLAC and all the, I guess, stakeholders that are supposed to inform an inclusive policymaking environment. And I want to start by talking about how much we must appreciate the role of organized labor in South Africa. And of course, we know that the National Manpower Commission, alongside the NEF, in essence call it the founding partners of NEDLAC, that of course informed then the act of NEDLAC. But I think it's important to go all the way down to 1922, it was 1922 or 1923, when there was the Rand Revolt. This is the most deadliest strike in the history of South Africa from a labor point of view. South Africa was coming out of World War I and was a big economic slump, of course. And you know, commodities were struggling at the time, and so the mining industry specifically was struggling. And so there was some labor substitution that was taking effect that informed the use of black labor, which was then cheaper labor than white. And in essence, it really made the white guys quite pissed off, and they decided to take to the street. I think north of 20,000 people took to the street at the time, and about 3,000 people died. And what that precipitated was then ultimately then Jan Smuts looking at this chaos and saying, actually, we have to figure out a way of organizing these people so we can address them meaningfully and address their needs meaningfully. And that birthed, in essence, the Labor Relations Act in South Africa. And so I think that started, I think the first draft came 1926, amended 1932, and then 1954, I think, was the next amendment. Only until 1979, by definition at least, of the word employee, were black people officially able to get full benefits of organized labor. 1979. And so that's the only time they met the full definition of the word employee. And so you understand that the context of organized labor in South Africa, I think, has a raw history. But when you look at then the importance of that insofar as how that's transcended over the years, I think when we think about labor and the role of organized labor in driving equitable labor outcomes in South Africa, I think that it's important for us to take that view. In fact, even when you look at some research around wage inequality in South Africa, where the largest amount of wage inequality exists is where people are not part of organized labor. And only 24% of the people in private sector in South Africa are part of organized labor. And that's where you see the highest wage discrepancy, wage inequality. And in fact, public sector's got the least wage inequality, right? And organized labor plays an incredible role there. And so I think the first thing I wanted to really, I think, surface is that even when we then now are at a precipice around the relevance and the functional use of organized labor, yes, I think there's lots of work that needs to come through in how they reimagine their contribution. But I think we can't throw the baby out with the water, especially when we're talking about the context of NEDLAC. And then this also then comes into a conversation about policy making in context or in crisis. right? And again, there's an interesting road down memory lane we can walk, right? Starting from 1994 with the RDP. RDP, main focus, social inclusion, bring services to the people, but broke government, you've got no funding, in essence, to support a large-scale development program like that. Fast forward to 1996, the birth of GEAR. And when you think about the RDP and the process of arriving at the RDP, and you look at, juxtapose that with GEAR, there's stark differences. GEAR first draft was drafted by 15 white economists, sanctioned by Trevor Manuel and Maria Ramos. 15 white economists, World Bank, UCT, a couple of other guys, writing a policy paper for the entire country. And that resulted in a hell of a lot of backlash, of course. And eventually President Mandela came out and said, if you are organized labor, if you are our tripartite alliance members, we're doing GEAR now and you're going to follow us. But the extent to which he had to go out and defend it means that something broke in the policy-making process. And so when we think about NEDLAC and when we think about things that break in the policy-making process, I think there's lessons we must take even in that part of our history. And fast forwarding then to ASKISA, NDP, etc. And so there are lessons again that I think are quite important in how we think about the 30 years in from a NEDLAC point of view, and think about the policy-making process. Is it in context or is it in crisis? And I think that's going to come through in the context of our conversations today. And then also, lessons around the GNU. Again, there's almost interesting mirrors that are happening in a today context and a 1994 context, where we're finding ourselves back at the GNU, in a GNU context 30 years later. What does that do to policy making? In fact, I'm one of the big proponents of the district development model. I'll tell you why. There's a body of literature called Ethnic and Linguistic Fractionalization, ELF, which often kind of studies how either heterogeneous or homogeneous societies tend to behave towards policy outcomes. And more heterogeneous societies like South Africa struggle to find policy coherence. So they take longer to land at a unified policy position, whereas more homogeneous societies struggle less. And so what a district development model, of course, does is that it inherently brings together people who are a lot more homogeneous at the district level. And so, again, there's literature that supports some of the complexities that we've had as a country in policy making and why sometimes it's so difficult. And so, in a GNU context, do we find some homogeneity in the process, or do we lose a lot more of that and we start to find a lot more heterogeneity? And I think that's going to inform how we think about the NEDLAC process going forward as well. And so I think all of that is really, I think, going to be some important things to think about as we, I think, go through the conversations today, some reflections today as well. And the last thing that I really want to nudge in our thinking is two schools of thought from an economics point of view. One is called nudge. In fact, when David Cameron in the UK became Prime Minister, had set up a whole office of behavioral economists studying how do you nudge society to behave a certain way. And so it's not policy making in an overhauling mechanism, but it's policy making along the fringes. And so when we're thinking about a policy-making process, how do we think about policy-making along fringes? And so making sure that we keep the very good part of our institutions, but, bite along the fringes. The other body of thought is chaos theory, which is often spoken about as the butterfly effect. And so that requires systems thinking. So it says, understand, find the nub, the cog in the system, that when you move it like this, it can have a reverberating effect. And so how much systems thinking do we do before we go into policy making? How much of the system do we care to understand? And so there are a lot of policies and bills that have been sent back because of a poor understanding of the system. And therefore we're never going to get that reverberating butterfly effect. And so sometimes just seeing and recognizing the system can give you such wide-scale benefit in the policy-making process. And so I think when we think about our conversations today, are we thinking in nudge or are we thinking in chaos? There's value in both, but I think it'll be important for us to continue chewing through that and making sure that we really, I think, come out with some enriched insights at the end of today. And so on the back of that intro, can I invite Mr. Toy for an official welcome?
Good afternoon once again, ladies and gentlemen. Now I have a speech here that I wrote, and then Usfiso spoke, and I'm thinking, does it actually work? Because this guy has just made life so difficult. But that being the case, let me speak nonetheless, and thank you for coming through this afternoon to be with us. As indicated earlier, I am the Managing Director of Frontline Africa Advisory. And what we have here today is the first in what we hope to be a series of conversations looking at public policy, how policy is made in the country, who gets to be part of the conversation, how do you become part of the conversation. And I think all of us here probably appreciate the hugely important role that NEDLAC has been given by our society, by our parliament, by our executive, to be the place where different constituencies can come together and we can have these conversations about the kind of society that we want to become. Now, from a focus point of view, on the 6th of September, NEDLAC came together and they looked at 30 years of the work that they have been doing. We do not have the means to review the work of NEDLAC over a 30-year period. So we thought we would limit ourselves to a 5-year period, and that period being the 6th administration starting in 2019 and ending earlier this year. In our minds, it was a good period to focus on because of the political change that I think we're all living under currently. I think many of us in this room went to the polls, probably expecting that there would be some changes, but I don't think many of us foresaw the possibility of a GNU. I think Matt there at the back was more hoping for it than foreseeing it being from the DA. But as Sifiso is saying, the moment we are in requires us, I think, to give a bit of thought to what are the systems and the mechanisms that we have at our disposal currently that are meant to serve us from a policy-making point of view. How have they served us in the period immediately preceding this current administration? And with the changed political dynamics, certainly at the level of the executive, certainly at the level of parliament, how will this affect the process of making policy? Now, if you are an observer of NEDLAC, which I believe you are, if you read the news, you would have noted in the summit that took place on the 6th of September that there was some honesty about what are some of the challenges that NEDLAC has to deal with. I think one of the things that came out is around ideology, that the constituencies can sometimes be far apart from an ideological point of view, and this can militate against reaching agreement in a lot of important cases. One of the other things that came out of that conversation was around how government regards the importance of NEDLAC in the policy-making process. Now, 2 days before the NEDLAC summit, the Portfolio Committee on Health convened and was briefed by the Department of Health, the Deputy Minister, specifically about the Tobacco Products and Electronic Nicotine Device Systems Bill. And this bill is being reintroduced. It lapsed, I think, on the 23rd of May when all other bills lapsed. So the Deputy Minister came there to reintroduce the bill. And one of the questions that came out of that session from the members of Parliament is, has NEDLAC had the opportunity to look at this thing? And the answer from the Department of Health was absolutely. We just have a few differences here and there. An interesting thing happens in the meeting in that the member for the African Transformation Movement, Vuyo Zungula, then pulls out a page from NEDLAC's annual report 22-23, and the convener for business, Kaiser Munyane, says in this published document, government did not put this thing on our agenda. It simply came and put it and briefed us about it and said they would come back, and they haven't come back. So we are still waiting, and we hope government will come back. And this is indicative of a tendency by government to bypass NEDLAC when it suits government. Now, this is the 4th of September. The 6th of September, the executive director of NEDLAC, Lisa Seftel, then stands up at the NEDLAC summit and says, this bill and other bills have bypassed NEDLAC. They have not been brought here for our attention, and we ask for government to come and bring it here. Now, I'm just using this as an example of saying, from a government point of view, there is a legitimate question to ask about the level of seriousness that government accords to this body, especially being a body of the state that was created by an act of parliament. And if we are to look at how we fix it, I think it's quite important that we look at the obligation both of Parliament and of the executive to promote and protect the mandate of this institution, which has been conferred by an act of Parliament. So hopefully, in the panel discussion, this is one of the things that will come out. Now, I'm not meant here to come and talk a lot. I'm just supposed to welcome you. And perhaps just to say one or two things from a program point of view. So today we're supposed to have the Department of Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation to talk to us about policy making under the GNU. If you read Business Day, you would have seen that on the 12th of July, the minister wrote a piece for Business Day and started outlining a rough framework on how the department would act as a coordination mechanism to mitigate and ameliorate the potential ideological and programmatic differences between the GNU partners. So this is the role that they would play. So we thought it's quite important because NEDLAC happens as part of a bigger system in terms of policy making. So it would be good to understand where the DPME, as the body that wants to coordinate policy making, how it sees the role of NEDLAC over the next 5 years. So until this morning, maybe yesterday, the DPME was on our program, and we woke up to the sad news this morning that they would no longer be part of our program. And part of the reason for that is because this is not a NEDLAC event. This is a Frontline Conversations event. And right at the beginning of our process of conducting the research that Dr. Mtimka will be presenting here, there was a bit of a miscommunication, I think, between ourselves, himself, and NEDLAC as a body. So they then decided that they would not be part of this event, and unfortunately, they've also gone and told other people not to attend this thing because it's not sanctioned by them. But that's neither here nor there. But perhaps it's indicative of something else. And those who participate on the daily in NEDLAC processes will probably be able to reflect on this much more than I can. And I think it's an issue that has come out in conversations here and there, that there may very well be an element of gatekeeping in terms of how NEDLAC does its work. Because one of the issues that comes up, and I think Dr. Mtimka will speak about it, is the issue of inclusivity in the work of NEDLAC. Some people are inside, some people are outside. Who gets to be inside? How do they get to be inside? Who's outside? And how do you come inside if you are outside that process? I think our experience putting this event together tells us very much that we are outside that process, and I think we should be comfortable with that. But I think it's important to reflect on how do we constitute the constituencies of NEDLAC, and how do we have conversations about NEDLAC in a meaningful way that allows voices that may not be well resourced. Not everyone is a Busa, not everyone is a Kosatu, but everyone has a view, everyone has something to say, everyone has an interest in how policy is made and what policy is made. So how do we bring those voices into that conversation? So maybe let me stop there, because I think we've gained a bit of time. Maybe just to say one last thing. The other speaker that we had on our program, I don't know if it's in the program that you have, was the General Secretary of the South African Federation of Trade Unions, Zwelinze Mavavi. As far as we know, he's still on his way, but he's not here now. And he was due to speak after I finish my few minutes. So with those few words, thank you very much for taking the time to come and be with us this afternoon. We really do appreciate that you took time off your busy afternoons, and we hope that we're all going to have a very engaging conversation. I should thank Matthew Parks, sitting somewhere towards the back there from Kosatu, because he actually flew in all the way from Cape Town to be part of this event. So thank you, sir. We really don't take your time for granted. We really are looking forward to some of the insights that you are going to share. And thank you.
Mr. Toy, is it cold outside of NEDLAC? You're wearing a jacket, but you're going to kotola. Kunzima. I think what's important about what Frontline is doing is bringing back thought leadership back to the policy-making process. I think we went through a lull where there wasn't that much thought leadership in our country, and how we think about policy making, how we think about and how we talk about it. Sanctioning research. Research is an undervalued commodity, and evidence-based policy making is the 8th wonder of the world. And so if we don't invest in finding evidence that will support our positions on policy, I think we're going to miss out on a lot. And so I think I'd like to invite everyone to actually give a round of applause to Frontline Conversations, I think, for kickstarting a process of thought leadership that can support evidence-based policy making. And on that note, Dr. Mtimka has got the evidence. So please come through.
Can I go ahead and adjust the mic? Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the invitation to come and speak today at this event. I am a systems theorist, and in fact both systems theoretic thinking and chaos thinking. Chaos theory thinking has characterized presentations I've been making recently, and I was happy, Mr. Toy, that I didn't plan to make reference to any of those today, so I don't feel like anything has been, is no longer relevant in my presentation. I'm Ongama Mtimka. I'm an academic at Nelson Mandela University. I was honored to be appointed by Frontline to do this research that's focused on NEDLAC. I've been involved in a process of writing a book titled Pathways to Inclusion, a Political Economy of South Africa in the 21st Century. So when, as part of my doing those interviews, I came across a stakeholder that was saying, can you zero in on this aspect for us and produce a report? It was quite an honor. So Mr. Goy makes reference to how NEDLAC initially reacted to this process. They were apprised of this research process that's taking place. And in our interactions, my last word to Lisa was that, you see, if an organization commissions research on itself, it's one thing, and they've done some really amazing studies. I've looked at the customer satisfaction survey, I've looked at their annual reports, and recent reports that they keep. Latest among them is the parliamentary tracker. So a lot of them are really good reports. But I said to her, once this study comes up, it's going to add to the body of knowledge about how we evaluate, how we think about NEDLAC, and how we evaluate NEDLAC. And the fact that it was not commissioned by yourselves eventually is going to actually work to your favor. And this is me not saying we are going to design the outcome to be a particular way. This was just me knowing that in any research process, you have good nuggets that come out of it, which you as an organization take pride in saying this was an independently commissioned study. And also there are those aspects which are critical. But the good thing about it is that it's an independently done study by an academic. I don't wish to be replacing any of the social partners as a person who sits at NEDLAC. So I thought I'd make reference to that. The study was done by myself, Professor Dion Pretorius, and Sianda Gade. Professor Dion Pretorius especially focused on studying the Nordic model. He has in the valley in Sundays River Valley in Cedarburg, as well as in Burgersfort in Limpopo, has been involved in processes of creating multi-sectoral development programs that are done mainly between farmers and stakeholders surrounding farming communities to create greater value for communities beyond, just the jobs that they get from farming enterprises. In terms of our major findings, just in case we lose half of the room by the time I complete the presentation, this is the thing to bear in mind. One, we looked at that period from 2019, and there's been, I was going to explain the research method later, but let me explain it now. So what we did is we triangulated the body of knowledge and our exercise. One, we looked at what NEDLAC says about itself in the recent publications that they've distributed. Two, we looked at what did stakeholders say about NEDLAC when they were commenting and were busy expressing themselves in the media in this period. When they were, in their mind, were not consciously responding to a survey, what did they say in those media interviews? And then lastly, we did some interviews by ourselves. And so by that, we have created, these findings are triangulated in that this is not, lastly, the method I used is grounded theory. So I didn't sit and say, what are the broad categories that I want to do this study? And all I simply did was to take the interview, the media articles, and start coding them. So if a person says something, I would say, what is the underlying thing that is being said here? And then from there, build the theory, build the findings. So what that does is that it creates a grounded findings, grounded theoretical study, in terms of which These cannot be said to be the mediated ideas of the researchers, because we just mined them as they were from the documents that we were getting them, and then did this process of coding and then reporting on them. Anyway, what is a consensus is that one, NEDLAC in this period transitioned from a leadership crisis to stability. We know that because NEDLAC started off with an executive director who had been dismissed, with other senior leaders within the organization, and the appointment was made of Lisa, and generally there's been stability throughout. The organization has cited a lot of successes, especially if you look at the customer satisfaction index that they did, survey that they did this year and last year. They cite a lot of successes. I'm going to comment about that later in terms of where we contextualize them. And then the key findings have been that, one, people feel that NEDLAC has been undermined. As such, the tendency to bypass it, mainly by government and then other social, other partners, has been there. And when people cited this tendency to bypass NEDLAC, made reference to how bilateral agreements tended to be a lot more attractive for the social partners than agreements that could be made at the multi-sectoral platform of NEDLAC, using the quadratic helix. So that's one of the key things. And then there's a concern that, yes, indeed, in our study we show that labor remains critical, and in fact we shouldn't wish away the organized nature of the South African workforce in South Africa. But an interesting aspect has happened within the labor movement, which is fragmentation, in terms of which in the last 15 years, you have seen that that voice of labor is no longer just bipartisan, but it's now become more labor stakeholders. I think about 3 or 4 institutions that now represent labor: NACTU, SAFTU, COSATU, and I think mainly these 3. So the argument is that fragmentation affects the coherence and the extent to which agreements can be brokered, because then there's games of who is going to budge first, who's going to give concessions first. Whereas business tends to speak from a unified voice, not because there aren't factions in business, but because generally the dominant voice is mainly coherent as far as business is concerned. This is a general view. Yes, you got instances where people feel that the small business sector is not properly represented. You have those instances, but in terms of which voice is strongest, you don't have strong competing voices from the business sector. And then there were concerns about the extent of representation of the community. In terms of the recommendations, it's very clear that what's emerging from both the interviews and the media stories is that stakeholders are saying we need a design-driven process in terms of which NEDLAC's strategic intent and mandate is up for debate again, so that you can create an organization that's fit for post-conflict building, post-conflict peace building, which was the overriding political transformation of the and this latter part is gone from this work of participants around the move from adversarial politics to collaborative politics. In both this presentation and in the fuller report, the mechanisms by which this can be achieved. I'm I'm not going to dwell much on the mandate, and we say this in conferences and notes, but we deal with it in the paper, so I'm sure Franklin is going to share the paper at some point. But I want to highlight these two subsections, 5.1a and 5.1e of the NEDLAC. One, it talks about strive to promote the goals of the country. If you start there is nothing but by implication that says the work should be limited to dialogue. That's what it says. And then secondly, at the end, encourage and promote the formulation of coordinated policy on social and economic then encourage and promote is an organization which is proactive and reactive in terms of playing an enabling role. I emphasize those two because they become important for the debates currently in terms of what NEDLAC becomes going forward. If I find time, we'll come back to this policy discussion. But what I noted when I analyzed the NEDLAC Act and the constitution of NEDLAC was that a significant qualification of the broadness of the mandate is made in the constitution, which qualifies what otherwise is a very broad mandate in the Act. But the constitution, so for example, the clause that's applicable is 5.1e in the Act, which is qualified by clause 4.1e in the constitution of NEDLAC to read, encourage and promote the formulation of coordinated policy on social and economic matters through social dialogue. Now, as I was, and that's an instructive qualification in my view. What I wasn't able to ascertain in this short time that we've been busy with this process is the history of that qualification making its way in the Constitution, which in fact is not there in the Act. But anyway, that's history. The future is, to what extent does NEDLAC morph into greater roles as envisaged by the Act to enable socio-economic development in the country? So that's the one question that was instructive for us. And two things there is that, one, we were asking this because we wanted to explain whether the concentration of NEDLAC into mainly the process of conducting research and analysis as part of supporting bills and narrowing of the role to facilitating comments of stakeholders in lawmaking processes, whether that had come by design or it became a matter of how the organization develops in the ordinary course of actors acting within that organization. The significance of that is that, one, it shows the extent of work needed to get NEDLAC to play a more meaningful role. Whether what we are going to move with going forward collectively as a country is a review and reform of the mandate, or in fact is going to be an emphasis on, no, you need to improve the agency of the organization so that it can achieve what otherwise is perceived to be a sufficient legal framework. So that's why that discussion is important. NEDLAC does a review itself. What I'm going to do for purposes of today, I'm just going to cite two things in terms of what NEDLAC says about itself, because it's been published out there. They've got the parliamentary tracker that has shown that has done an analysis of what bills have come to NEDLAC, how long they've been there, how long did it take stakeholders to finalize them, and what happened subsequently. Mostly, the parliamentary tracker reflects that NEDLAC is important because some of the things that arise from NEDLAC go on to be implemented, incorporated in the bills. But there are instances where young people would say Parliament simply blue-ticked the sitting of NEDLAC, where they participated and government departments were there and things were noted and responses were given in terms of even if there was a refusal to incorporate some of the ideas into the laws, some conditions in terms of, under which implementation is going to be limited on the thorny issues, where it actually goes on not to even reflect that. So in two instances that is highlighted in the Economic Transport Regulation and Upgrade of Land Tenure Amendment Bill. And then also they highlight that, you see sometimes with representative structures, the legitimacy thereof is sometimes in doubt. What I think is important that NEDLAC cites in the parliamentary tracker is that they find that some of the issues that come from NEDLAC also find expression in public participation processes, which shows that these people who represent the constituencies, they represent the 4 broad constituencies at NEDLAC, are in fact tuned in to the rest of society in terms of what's happening. Then there's the survey. What's interesting about the survey is that stakeholders rank performance of NEDLAC in terms of the given criteria of a quantitative instrument very highly, with the lowest performance indicator there being at about 65%, but everything else between 70 and 80. Now, this is interesting. It's good, it's legitimate. I looked at the survey, I looked at the criteria. It's also done by it's commissioned by NEDLAC, by an independent party. So it's good. I mean, you can see when you read the survey why NEDLAC is scoring very highly on the indicators. And it's simply this, that most of what is in the survey of customer satisfaction is mostly about organizational management issues. And as I said, even from the qualitative report and from the interviews, stakeholders that I was interviewing were careful to separate between micro-organizational performance and management and the strategic intent and mandate, because the latter is influenced by the broader context from a systems theoretic point of view. It's influenced by the broader context of who is around the table. So, for example, if there's a failure to reach agreements, you cannot say that's a function of micro-organizational factors. So that's why it's important to separate. So the survey, when you look at the survey and you look at this report, we're not saying things that are, a stark difference. We are looking at different criteria. We're looking at qualitative perspectives of people who are not participating in a review exercise versus people who are sitting in a predetermined code. So the questions around the areas of organizational performance are set up front. You know what I mean? So now let's go quickly to, I'm going to skip on the general reflections from that exercise because of time. But I think what's important is that NEDLAC does cite how instrumental they were during the COVID-19 process, and how also as part of the post-July unrest responses, NEDLAC was instrumental. And I think those are the two things I'd like to highlight. I've already addressed the research methods. Let me go straight to our findings in terms of the media articles that we reviewed. We randomly, so Google allows you to track reporting on a matter and put in a timeline. It's from this time to that time. Google, and then also we've got our own EBSCO host databases in the university where you can repeat the same search. I was able to randomly select about 16 articles from that. And then we, as I said, what we then did was to read the articles to extract the voices of stakeholders from those articles. And we started with the process of taking each quotation in terms of what a person says and say, what's happening here? What is this person saying? What's the underlying idea? And that came up with these initial codes, which in the final report are reported as themes. So the big issue that came across right from 2019 up until, in fact 2020 up until today, is the elusive social compact. And this is, if you just Google NEDLAC, you will find that this is one of the big stories. The failure of the partners collectively at NEDLAC to have this one grand social compact. And how, in the last year or so, the social compact has been replaced in practice by bilateral agreements, which some stakeholders have said is a bypassing exercise of NEDLAC. So social compact, the next issue is around relevance of NEDLAC. And around the relevance of NEDLAC, there were comments about how, for example, government ministers no longer regard NEDLAC seriously. How meetings would be convened and people simply don't pitch, and meetings have to be postponed, and then the next sitting, again, people don't pitch. So those things, and then the other issue that came from these reference to a new approach to NEDLAC. And this new approach is around how NEDLAC can observe the tendencies of social partners in terms of how they choose to resolve issues, and see whether it can incorporate in its value proposition and its range of activities those things, so that it brings them back. Because in systems theory, and in fact in strategy, there is the deliberate strategy, and then there's the emergent strategy. In systems theory, there's the idea of an emergent phenomenon. And what it accommodates is the idea that sometimes what develops from the interactions of subsystems is something I thought I was, I'm sorry. I thought I was moving the presentation. It's something whose outcome is greater than its constitutive parts. So I've been defending South African democracy, especially to international media and international audiences, by saying, you see, if you look at South African democracy by singling out key elements of it, you will miss its dynamism. Because at the time we had the dominant party. And I said, if you want to understand the dynamism of South Africa's democracy, look at how power is negotiated, sometimes not by warm bodies or bums on seats, but by emergence. And that emergence works through the role of non-profit organizations litigating, some political parties making parliament ungovernable, among other things. And I would argue that the greater effect, or the cumulative effect of that, gives us the nature and character of South African democracy in a systems theoretic sense, rather than wanting to equate our democracy to its constitutive parts. So you just look at elections alone, or you look at individual aspects alone. Now, we included these so that we don't think that these things that we say here have come not from grounded theory, from grounded in the stories or the interviews, but from our heads. The issue about an existential crisis, the undermining of NEDLAC, the challenges in implementing resolutions made at NEDLAC. These have been expressed by stakeholders commenting in the media, talking about how even last year this issue of an existential crisis is a running theme. And even senior within the executive of NEDLAC, this theme was one of the first things that Lisa said, when she came on board, that unless there's a process of remaking NEDLAC, it's going to be irrelevant. Let me go to now the findings from interviews. But generally here, from the media comments of stakeholders, it was quite clear. One, it's interesting how the idea is long-lasting among stakeholders, that NEDLAC is definitely needed. Not even one person who was very critical in the interviews said, we must do away with NEDLAC. Even in the stories that I was looking at, some of the fiercest critics were talking about how the need to modify the institution rather than to eliminate it. And also the leadership crisis issue, and then the general feeling from internal and external stakeholders that the organizations, the partners had failed to reach the social compact. So that's come from there. In the interviews, the main issue is problems at NEDLAC. And I deliberately didn't say problems with the organization from a micro-organizational perspective again, because go and read the reports. We started this reviewing annual reports, and we saw that there's nothing by way of organizational management that's an issue. But I'll talk about something else which was related to organizational agency, which is the activism of the organization in being able to reassert its authority. One of the interviewees, for example, was saying NEDLAC is not taken seriously. And I asked them, what if the person who was an executive at NEDLAC, let's say was Thabo Mbeki? And I was cheeky, but also I was wanting to test what idea is underlying this comment from the interviewee. They then replied to say, actually, somebody who has political weight, but also has respect from across the sectors, does influence the extent to which the organization can be treated. But anyway, so that's this is one issue about the agency of the organization. And I had asked this from the interviewee because I made the point that early in my professional life, I worked for young organizations. And the thing about young organizations is that respect was not a given. So you didn't have a heritage of a brand strength, if you like, or perceptions of strength on the part of the organization per se, which would then command. So all these organizations had been organizations, among them is Kucha, for example, the Kucha Development Corporation. Among them was a leveraging of their own agency to assert themselves in the system. And I think it's Arthur Koestler who talks about how in living systems you have what he calls hold-ons, and a hold-on is the nature of an organism that has got in collaboration and plays with the system to fit in, but also it's a self. Here I'm doing this again. It's an organization that also has got an assertiveness and autonomy. So it has enough dynamism to assert its autonomy, but at the same time, it has enough dynamism to play along with others so that it is not overbearing. And this is a key dynamism of living organisms or subsystems. Problems at NEDLAC, as I mentioned, these related to the big issue was the ability to reach agreements and the role of one, competition among stakeholders vying for the same constituencies. I have to be wise now because I don't want, when I leave here, I have one stakeholder that says I have a problem with, either business or labor. So they were saying competition, and this competition is playing out in the propensity to reach agreements. Because in their nature, agreements of diverse sectors are compromises. So the first to compromise has to worry about the gaze of the other and the gaze of the constituency. And the language of sellout gets employed in order to frame whoever budges first. So this is one of the issues that was mentioned. Related to it, so because this one is competition per se, competing for membership and preeminence. But another aspect related to problems at NEDLAC was the seemingly stark differences from an ideological point of view. The failure to create win-win solutions. I mentioned fragmentation. The agency of NEDLAC I've explained. And this is how the references in the text is coming up so far. And so far we've coded about 50% of the interviews. And this is how, the references or the share of issues and problems at NEDLAC is the biggest. Again, this is not a quantitative study. It's a qualitative study. The issue for us is those statements and what they mean rather than their number and their occurrence in the study. And then I thought also I will also take from the interviews what is it that was said, because what we then take to be a code is built from a statement. So here, participant 5, and this was a confidential process, so we told interviewees we are not going to mention themselves by name. Some of you are in the room, some of you are not. So participant 5 argued the point, unless you reinvent yourself as an organization, and deliberately so, and you introspect on an ongoing basis, you're actually going to become irrelevant simply because somebody has learned how to do things better, faster, and they provide the service. So, and then that's the last two comments, and then I'll close. Labor is doing exactly the same thing. So this person was saying business has had a tendency to have bilateral agreements with government. They were making reference to the process last year in August, and they argue labor has had the same tendency when they think that they can get more, like how the labor law review process. And the allegation this person makes is that when labor perceives that they can strike better deals on a bilateral relationship with the minister, then that's what they do. And lastly, in terms of what I'm citing, is a view that NEDLAC, it's either the constitution or the act can be changed for the imperatives of today. And I've heard that there's a process that's taking place now for this. And our recommendations, I'm going to skip the part that talks about the Nordic model, but that part is only about how to negotiate tensions. Because in the Nordic countries, they didn't wish away highly organized labor. They struck agreements which were win-win. In fact, with corporates agreeing to higher tax rates because government then went on to prove themselves that they can actually use the money efficiently for the benefit of everybody. I'm not going to mention them, the recommendations, but one of them which I want to highlight is this one that looks at a holistic review, as we would do when we do a strategic management process, where you start from the strategic intent of the organization. even if it does already have a vision, mission, and core values. You start by a debate that says, because I asked the interviewees, why, if you feel this much, why do you think this organization should continue to exist? And the answers to that question in a collective planning process are the ones that lead to a new design-driven organization. Thank you for the invitation. You know now that academics tend to speak a lot, so thank you.
You know, the CEO of Nokia said we didn't do anything wrong, but we still lost. And I think it's this idea around continuous reinvention at an enterprise level. You know, and as we were talking about the whole on in a NEDLAC context, I thought about how mosquitoes play. You know, the mosquito will play while it's light, play around you, it won't bother you too much, and then it'll assert itself when it's dark. You know, and so play around while it's light and then find your levers when it's dark. You know, and so certainly I think really interesting there. And I mean, I just wanted to quickly, you know, reflect on the point that you made about this kind of, you know, either idea of bypassing NEDLAC or finding cornered, you know, half gaps for more bilateral, I guess, opportunism towards policy making. And quick reflection is exactly what I didn't, step two of what I didn't talk about earlier when I was speaking about gear. And it's also what we're finding again in recent times, and this is where private sector also can misbehave. There was the South African Forum, SAF, and it was large corporate, 1996, they came together, and then they wrote the economic paper for South Africa, including their ideas of a liberalized labor context. If you look at what the SAF wrote, and I mean at the time it was rubbished as you know, an Afrikaans-led anti-labor agenda, it expressed itself in gear. Look at what's happening today. What happened in Minerals Council, for example, right? They went directly, they wrote with President Ramaphosa their own policy paper. And that translated into then ultimately how Transnet gets managed, right? And so we need to also call business out sometimes when they behave in a way that's not necessarily in the best interest of everyone. And it's in these half gaps that they find as well, in that they found that it's easier to be able to do this way, and we can circumvent, and so we'll say the act is there, but legislation can change. And so I think these are some of the things that are real tensions, I think, that we really must interrogate more meaningfully. And thank God we've got a panel to do that better than I can on my own. And so certainly I think to move on our conversation, I'd like to invite our panelists onto the floor. And I'm just going to confirm if everyone on our panel is here today. I do know that Mr. Parks is here. Please will you welcome Mr. Parks to the stage. Mr. Kagaza is here as well. Please will you welcome him onto the stage. Mr. Tsotetsi is here as well. Please welcome him to the stage from the DTIC. And Mr. Mukoki is also here. Please welcome him to the stage. And I think I like how this panel looks, because we've got Chamber of Commerce here as well, and so I'm talking about that private sector misbehavior. So he's going to answer on their behalf. We've got labor here. They don't take nonsense. You know. We've got DTIC, they hide when it's time to get serious about incentives. you know. And so certainly I think, you know, it really is going to be a rich discussion, and we're hoping that we're really going to unearth some good texture coming out of today. So what we're going to do is that we're going to kick off with just some opening remarks, get into some, I guess, interview-led panel conversations, and then we will open to you guys as well. Mr. Mukoki, you may come onto the floor. And then we will invite you guys, of course, to interact with our panelists. We will take one round of questions, get them to answer, and come back and take another round. Thank you very much. And so I think to kick off the conversation, I mean, I think there are a number of things that have emerged today around one, issues of existentialism and existential crises, issues around being fit for purpose or relevant, issues of I guess, gravitas and influence, as well as issues of a breakdown in the social contract and compact. And so if I may start with you, Mr. Mukoki, just from an opening remarks point of view, just your reflections, 30 years in, there are a number of themes that have emerged, you know, and just your opening remarks on the issues.
Thanks. Can you hear me? No. Is it on? Yeah, I think that thanks, Sfiso. These are indeed very, very critical and very big issues. I would say that in the last 30 years, we have not done that which we thought we could do. And I think that you'd recall that those three major challenges, as the previous speaker was talking about, of economic growth, the creation of wealth, you know, the issue around social equity, and the issue of participation, I doubt that the NEDLAC has managed to achieve on any of those things. Yes, from time to time you'll have maybe big labor coming in, talking about national minimum wage, they win that, or they win on something to do with the, you know, the Labor Act or something like that. But I don't think that fundamentally the objectives, the overall objectives of why you put together the chamber were ever going to be met, in my view. And you then have to also deal with the issue of the asymmetry of, I was saying outside talking to some colleagues, the asymmetry of knowledge and skills between the participating parties. Because everybody else brings a different level of experience, education, access to technology, and all those particular things on particular subjects. So if you've got partners that you believe are equal, and we are now coming in to discuss, for instance, one of the 4 items that NEDLAC talks about, the area of public finance and management policy. To what extent can you really say that all these people are operating at the same level? The 4 partners at NEDLAC, the business, big government, big labor, and big community groups. So unless people are particularly interested in a particular area, that isn't necessarily going to address the nature of the problem and the challenge as it relates to the broader South Africa. Because part of the issues, and I've said it NEDLAC over many years, and part of the issues that we've tended to face there is that in a number of cases, and I think that the previous speaker was relating to that as well, the individual partners come in there as individual partners. And I've not experienced myself people who were, perhaps maybe when Begi was there, Begi Njali, he tended to have a very, very different take on speaking on behalf of big labor, but wanting to always incorporate the interests of South Africa at large. And I cannot say that I've seen that much of that part of an action from the other partners. Of course, government will say that this is what we're actually trying to do. So in that sense, I don't think that we've resolved the issue that you're relating to. If you say in systems thinking you want to get to the nub of the problem, and South Africans by our nature were not particularly good at looking at the root cause of the problem. We tend to run around with solutions looking for problems, but we never actually sit down to say, wait a minute, wait. In the first place, do we need NEDLAC if these are the things that you're trying to achieve? So NEDLAC ended up, in my view, becoming an organization of friends or partners that will come and meet and discuss a particular item, but I didn't necessarily see South Africa there. and I haven't actually seen it, and I speak as someone who's actually sat there and participated in a number of discussions. So I do believe that NEDLAC, those who say scrap NEDLAC and those who say that review NEDLAC are actually both right. You do need to do either of the two things so that you can recompose the whole thing and try and look for, do you even have the right partners, and are they all, number one, committed to the same thing? Just lastly, you know, the Indian scholar Amita Sen, he has this to explain. He talks about 3 kids who are fighting over ownership of a flute, and he's trying to talk about the idea of justice. He says it's Anne, Bob, and Carla. Anne says that she should own the flute because of the 3 of the kids, without contesting the claims of the other 2, she is the only one who can actually play the flute. So she's making the argument of a utilitarian economist. Bob on the other side says, wait a minute, of the 3 of us, I'm the poorest, therefore I deserve the flute because my parents cannot buy me any other toy, right? And the 3rd child, Carla, she says, wait a minute, I am the one who made it. It was my blood, sweat, and tears that made the flute, so I'm the one who must actually own it. And I think therein lies the challenge that Amata Sen talks about, that NEDLAC has struggled to resolve. Thanks.
Sheesh, what an opening. Mr. Fox.
Yeah, so maybe I'm one of those friends at NEDLAC. So look, NEDLAC is a creature of human beings. Human beings are not perfect. Some will come there, make a real effort, will get things done. Others will come there, misbehave and play and fail. But NEDLAC has achieved many things. And I can imagine if we didn't have NEDLAC, we'd be far worse off as a country. But NEDLAC isn't government. It's not going to resolve every single issue as a country. Even government can't resolve it. Even parliament can't resolve it. And the useful thing about NEDLAC is that it tries to cement the idea of a social compact with all of its imperfections and all of our challenges as a country. But it brings together government with all of its issues. It brings organized business with all of its issues, labor, community, etc. And we all have our issues. And look, there are times when it goes through a bit of a rough patch, like any other human organization. It has its ups, its downs. There was times that even us at Labour would get frustrated. Are we just coming here to talk? But we also made a bit of a conscious effort over the past 8 years to try to revive NEDLAC. It wasn't easy at first. We had a presidential job summit in 2018, roughly. Some good things, some bad things. I think the one difficult thing is that how do you bind agreements upon parties afterwards? Because we can all put anything nice on paper. It's another thing to implement. We had the minimum wage agreement. It took about 2 years to get agreement. It wasn't easy. Business and labor were far apart. When we did it, people were cursing us left, right, and center, swearing at us, collapse the economy, or it's a sellout, one of the two. You must just choose which adjective. But today, and again, it's not perfect, but today it's helped to raise the wage of 6 million workers. People, you had farm workers a decade ago getting as little as 6 Rand an hour. Today on law, they're entitled to 27 Rand 58 cents. Again, not perfect. Not everybody's getting it. There's issues of compliance, etc. But for those who get it, that's a step forward. During COVID, no one in the world had a blueprint for how to manage a global pandemic. We literally had a couple of days where we sat before the shutdown with the Department of Labor, say how to manage the transition with presidency, treasury, etc. And the UF had, with all of its chaos, we managed to get 65 billion Rand released from the UF to help 5.7 million workers. Workers at restaurants, were intervening with the hospitality sector, ballerinas, everybody under the sun. And really, people can curse us, say, but there's no social compact, which is solving everything. It's fine. But the response to the COVID-19 pandemic, from the UF relief, the loan guarantee scheme with all of its issues, the SOD grant with all of its issues, that was a social compact in practice, where we were sitting with business colleagues on a daily basis trying to intervene at restaurants and make sure workers got the money. We were on the practical ground, we made sure at clothing factories, the vaccinations were rolled out, etc., etc. And we were able to even respond with a package of relief after the violence in July 2021, because they had built a bit of a close relationship between business, labor, government, community. Even though we might swear at each other half the time, it's fine, but we knew there was more that unites us than divides us. Even we had Raises Kosato as Labour in 2020, our proposal, let's assist Eskom with a debt relief package. Again, people cursed us. There's one particular blue part, I'm not picking on anybody sitting in the corner, Matthew, which did a little video which made my life very complicated for a few months. But today, and look, our proposal didn't reach complete fruition, but the idea was achieved. We have a debt relief package for Eskom. There was a rallying call of everybody contributing to trying to assist Eskom as a most strategic single national economic asset, which all of us depend upon. So I think there is a lot of progress on it. It's not always easy. We've worked in the last few months, and I'll stop checks, others are gone too long, on the rolling out of the two-part pension reform. So we sit as government, business and labor to say how do we assist in addressing issues. So you find lots of pockets of agreement. There are areas where we fight with each other, like on the labor law reforms, but there are also many areas where we do agree. And I think we're better off as a society for it. I can just imagine if we didn't have it. Maybe my last point, Chair, is that when we're busy with the response to COVID-19, we're able as labor to phone our colleagues in business and say, can you deploy a mobile vaccine clinic to a May Day rally for workers? So that's a good thing, because we'll fight each other tomorrow, but today can we agree to fix things? Thanks.
Sure. Thanks, Mr. Parks. Well, at least we know that there's one person in the room also who says, let's make some love. Mr. Kagaza.
No, thank you. Or maybe we'll continue using this. I think I did open it. Oh, thank you. No, thank you. Thank you, Program Director. I think one thing that one must appreciate today is the fact that somebody outside NEDLAC took an initiative to talk about NEDLAC. Because you see, when NEDLAC talks about itself, it will do these things that the researcher found in the report. But one thing that one would appreciate is when the research goes beyond just talking about NEDLAC, but the use of NEDLAC as a tool. Because at some point in time, you get frustrated, I'm not talking on behalf of NEDLAC, I'm talking on behalf of the community constituents at NEDLAC. You get frustrated that you don't believe that you are making inroads in terms of what you are supposed to be doing. Because then you have got these different constituencies, have got different interests. But what about the people who are going to use that information that is coming from NEDLAC, the legislatures, the parliament? What is their interest in NEDLAC itself? Because you'll find that the executive will want to jump NEDLAC because they've got a deadline to meet, and NEDLAC for them is a nuisance. Would come to NEDLAC and found a Lucas Kagaza there who doesn't care, who only wants to see that communities don't suffer on the basis of a policy that is non-implementable. And therefore would ask very valid questions to say, but this thing of yours, department, how does it solve this problem here? And therefore those hard questions would actually make somebody to react. And the reaction sometimes is not very good. Say, no, I can't go to NEDLAC. Those people will grill you. They don't have mess. They are merciless. When labor, you are sitting there, you are saying, no, this is what we want to do. They will just ask you, how does it assist the workers, this thing? And therefore, they are asking the question in the interest of the workers, their constituency. But you come there, you want to defend and something that maybe you did desktop, because that's what sometimes we would believe as constituencies, that these people, they just sent with researchers there, desktop there, pushed papers, and therefore there's no practical application that they actually thought of what they are bringing in front of NEDLAC. So I'm just saying that whilst we all agree that NEDLAC is the best tool that can actually assist the country to move forward, but is that consensus only in consensus at NEDLAC? But what about the people who are using that information? So all I'm saying is, for me, there are important matters that need to be considered, and that's why I'm appreciating that somebody outside NEDLAC has taken initiative, and that is the Frontline Conversations, and then commissioning the good doctor to then do this research. But the use of these tools that are actually done, not necessarily by people who are affected, but now when I'm saying affected, the players themselves, but the players outside the process. Because it's easy to sit down there and defend your own. Whatever we do at NEDLAC, we can defend it. Left, right, and center, we can defend it. And say, no, this is good, this is, even if we didn't reach consensus, but we spoke and we agreed to disagree. But the NEDLAC report, when it goes there, it shows the agreements and disagreements. And when it is considered on the other side, we're not there. As NEDLAC players, we're not there. The people who look at it, do they find it useful? And if they just put it aside and move on, like the other people would do in a report, and so let's say the Secretary General, the General Secretary puts a report and say, we hear the report, but there's an issue. so put the report aside, but this is the issue that we want to discuss. So I'm saying some of these things is, we are at a stage as society that we also need to be very critical of whatever we're doing. Because if we are not critical of what we are doing, I mean, why are we doing it in any way? And we are not critical of what we are doing. Because if we do things to tick a box, the tick box exercise that would be done, I know if this thing was at NEDLAC, including the bill that they were speaking about here, that it was at NEDLAC, and I know that at least it was not at NEDLAC, because some of us were lobbied by people who wanted the bill to come to NEDLAC. And then they bypass NEDLAC and it's there, and they say, but the report says it was at NEDLAC. You got what I mean? So I'm saying some of these things is that we must then critically look at how the people that are using the information that can view that information that they are receiving. Because if for them it's just a tick box exercise, then we don't need NEDLAC. Because we don't need tick box exercises at this stage of our democracy. We need the real issues, and we need to focus on real issues that would change the lives of our people. Because whether we agree or not, I mean, things are deteriorating. Here, the life, I mean, today, things were gone so up, at least now the petrol is coming down. We hope that interest rates will go down. But if you go to workers on the ground, life has become unaffordable. And therefore, you need things that will bring the change that we envisaged. Those of us who were there at that stage, we envisaged certain things that we are not seeing now. And there's no hope that we will see if certain things continue in a certain way. I thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Dada.
Yes, sir. I think I'm audible. Thank you, MC, and to the panelists. Yeah, look, I think as government, maybe it was appropriate that I speak last, because...
So that you can depend.
Not necessarily, but the intention, because as government represents everyone. It's the government of people. So there's no government without business. There's no government without labor. There's no government without civil society. So and obviously, all these stakeholders represent different interests. You know, sometimes there is alignment, but sometimes obviously they're miles apart. And I think maybe that's why I want to agree with all three of them. There are things that they actually said that we agree. For example, Matthew, there were things that we did and I think it showed us that when we are in a crisis mode, the country starts working. COVID is one example that actually showed what we can actually do. And Labour lobbied hard to get the COVID tests, to pass through. And the way discussions within government, some people nearly lost their jobs because it was that serious. Because some of it, there were no rules that govern some of the things that I think Labour were proposing, and that thing needed to happen, as in like yesterday. So the issue that do you go and break the law, or do you make the law quickly to function? So at some stage, obviously the president be frustrated because the country was in serious predicament. Some of the things he had to announce even before they could actually be a bit to show that we are a government that actually respond quickly to, but also the appreciation of what business did at the time to put aside all the differences to actually, this is what you can do from our side as business. You'll know, I think, government, we put about 10% of the GDP, about 500 billion, was set aside. These are the measures that we believe they can actually help the economy to actually function. Of course, not all of it, now the implementation that comes in, that's where the challenge is. There were funds that were set aside for SMMEs, but we also realized that there were things that social partners, when some of the way had to come to play, they couldn't do that. Business had problems, especially the banks, in terms of supporting SMMEs. Because the conditions that they had for SMMEs were similar to the conditions that they had without COVID. So it was very difficult for SMMEs to actually access some of those funds. So these are things that we realized that maybe we could have done them better. But NEDLAC does work. There were things that we believe where we are sitting. The Bella bill now that's been spoken about, it has gone through NEDLAC. NEDLAC is in support of it. It has been taken through all these processes. It's just that I think maybe one of the things, but I believe that things can be done much quicker. The point that is making that something can take 2 years. A member of government, we got a 5-year plan as government. So there's elections, political parties promise the South Africans, this is what you're going to do if you vote for us. And in that 5 years, you therefore have to process certain things. And if you're going to take a bill for 2 years to do, you only have 2 years to actually implement it. And then you have the pressure within government to say, but I need to deliver. I had promised, and this is something that is needed by community. So sometimes it does, we find it difficult where we feel that maybe NEDLAC processes are a bit slow for government that must be responsive. As I said, if the approach we can is similar to the one that we had for COVID, I think things can move much quicker. We can really cause a serious stand, because we can't be sitting here still talking about 30% unemployment rate. The GDP has not been growing, like 1% in the last decade or less than that. So surely there are things that we need to say what that can be done from that side to assist in terms of unlocking some of those things. You don't necessarily need a so-called social competitiveness, but you need to see actions moving. And as I said, NEDLAC has 4 chambers. One of the things that we picked up is that I think I represent the trading industry chamber, but the overall convener is Department of Labor that has also its own labor chamber. There's also public finance. I think maybe that kind of, if we can agree, and say, do we need all the 4 chambers, or how many chambers do we need? Because there are issues that get discussed at a labor chamber that also affect the industry chamber. And vice versa. Some of the public finance issues does affect the trading industry chamber. So maybe there's a way in which we need to find a way of reviewing some of those chambers. Do we need 4 chambers, or do we need 2 or 3 chambers? And are they all functioning? Some of those chambers, because I'm sort of tempted to speak to the trading industry chamber work, but it is a bit difficult, because as I said, there's been one can actually tick box in terms of some of the successes that we've had from the trading industry chamber. Even the current work that we're doing, some of the institutions that we have in the country, like Competition Commission, or the whole even competition tribunal, all competition authorities, the Act itself, before you could do it, NEDLAC played a very, very critical role in making sure that there's institutions like that in the country. So there has been some of those successes over the last 8 years. But I think maybe more can be done. And also the commitment once agreement has been reached, implementation of some of those things. Matthew spoke about the Job Summit, 2018 Job Summit. It's still a bit of a sore thing for me because we had agreed. There was enthusiasm when President Ramaphosa took over in 2018. He announced all these summits that he's going to have, one of them being the Presidential Job Summit. There's business, everyone was quite keen on some of those things, and we agreed. The issue came at the implementation level. Now we said we have agreed, we've made these commitments, President has agreed. Can we now start getting the work done? And we felt that somehow we were not moving at the same pace that we had actually agreed. And that's something that even when we were hit by COVID 2 years later, now some of the work that we were trying to do, and we had to make sure we include them into the economic recovery plan that we actually had. But implementation for us, I think from all social partners, it's something that's actually lacking. That's something that's going to break NEDLAC as we know it, because not all of us sometimes get committed from all the sides. And I think maybe some sort of, I don't know whether the escalation mechanism that we need to have to make sure if things are not happening, how then do we ensure that we bring all the key conveners to actually make us do work. The president now has the operation for Lindlela. If you see the success that it's actually having, because it's those bilateral engagements that you now have in business there, labor is there, and government is there, and things are moving because you get the quick response in terms of there's an issue, it gets resolved. There's ESCOM 1, there's now further logistics work that's been done. Some of those things, yes, there's a briefing that happens at NEDLAC, but the implementation is happening somewhere. The report goes to President quicker, but is this not something that NEDLAC ought to be driving? Because there are some of the things that we do. So let me stop there, because as I said, we can talk until...
No, I was saying sheesh, not shush. At the launch of NEDLAC, President Mandela was quoted saying, "Our democratic gains will be shallow and persistently threatened if they do not find expression in food and shelter, in well-paying jobs, and rising living standards." And this says nothing about consultation and national dialogue, etc. And this is at the launch of NEDLAC, right? And I think it speaks to your points, Mr. Kagaza, about the users of the process, of the outcomes of the process. And I'm going to go through one round of panel questions, and then we'll definitely open to you guys for discussion as well. And Mr. Mkoki, you mentioned something about justice, right? When the GNU was, tentatively coming on board, there was the big boogeyman, which was the market and the rand. We saw what had happened, and so I ended up doing some analysis around, what's this thing, And it turns out there's quite a bit of literature actually done in South Africa and in Brazil about notions of democracy and how the rand responds. And so while, call it the liberal market, celebrates democracy, and this is why the question was, if then, it's democracy at work, why is the rand weakening, right? Before there was more certainty about GNU. It says, while the market recognizes democracy, it only recognizes it insofar as it responds to market-based dynamics and not social justice. And so when you've got parties who are then lobbying more on the social side, the rand inherently weakens because the boogeyman only recognizes democracy in institutional frameworks only and not in social and economic justice. And so I'm bringing this back to you because you mentioned justice, Ndata Mukoki, around then from your perspective, the justice conversation has been led only from the other players and never private sector, right? They're the ones they're the boogeyman around this justice and economic justice conversation. When we think about justice and the function of NEDLAC, how does that play itself out, particularly then in your role in that space?
I think that's a very interesting question when you talk about markets. I think there's a time when Trevor Manuel was the Minister of Finance, and he had made a statement about what is this thing called the market, something amorphous, so big words that he had used at the particular time. And the rand nearly crashed because someone did something or said something. South Africa is a very interesting place that the most quoted economists are not the ones that come from the academy, with respect to my friend here. They are the ones who work for banks and mining houses. Because they do trade, they hold positions in terms of the currency, the commodity price, the equity prices, whatever the case might be. And I think that one of the key questions when we speak about asymmetry, the dispersion of skills and competencies when it comes to understanding certain things is very different in South Africa, and that goes for perception, okay? The economy of South Africa is run by 5 professions, 5, in terms of decision making. There's the accountants, there's the chartered accountants, because they are the CFOs of companies, and they determine whether capital will be allocated or not allocated. Companies making profits, not making profit, declaring dividends or not declaring dividends. They are very, very, very influential people. The second category of people, not in any order, bankers. I certainly grew up in banking as an investment banker. They will determine whether you are going to get a loan or you are not. And banks are always going to tell you, we look at the objective facts. It's not true. They look at the objective facts, but they look at many subjective factors. We say in banking, we invest in a person, not the project. If you're the wrong person, even if you have a great project, you're not going to get the money. Not in South Africa. The third would be the actuarials, science people, the actuaries, because they work for their wealth companies and insurance companies. They make all these determinations on risk, et cetera, And you've got the engineers, whether they are digging mineral from the ground, building a bridge, running a power system, building plant and equipment. They build the projects on which these top 3 actually are going to deploy capital or not. And then you've got the economists, and they are going to say, well, the economy is okay or not okay, okay? There's a very significant problem in South Africa that we've created when we talk about asymmetry. There's a simple understanding that in the private sector, we in the private sector are the people who've got the skills. And the people in the public sector are the people who don't actually have the skills. It is not actually true. You do not understand the ignorance that happens to sit amongst top business leaders in South Africa today. Because we know how to calculate the ratio, the ROE, the ROA, the IR, the WACC, the weighted average cost of capital. But in a number of cases, I had my son, he went to vets, he says he wants to study accounting. I said, come here, he's studying P accounts. Let me see your subjects. He was doing information systems, computational maths, micro and macroeconomics. He's doing accounting, and I'm looking at this, but you're not being taught anything, are you? You are being taught to do a job. The technical skills. The problems of South Africa are not just technical. They need leaders who can understand the complexity of a man who's sitting in Alexander in a shack and he does not have running water. You're not going to get that level of aptitude from the typical business leader in South Africa who has become influential even here at NEDLAC and is now determining policy. So the rand will crash because the person who wants the rand to crash does not have information himself about the nature of the problem in South Africa and what the challenges are. And it's not only as it relates to the rand. We work at Saki before COVID. We used to invite all these foreign missions, inbound, top business people would come to South Africa. We hosted the Dutch Prime Minister, with the Austrians, with the Germans. South African businessmen and women, by their nature, those who are in charge now, are very uncomfortable working in an environment that does not align with their own culture. If you don't speak English, they don't actually know how to work with you. Many of our organizations struggle when they go global because we lack the skills, because we've assumed people have got skills because they're accountants and engineers, and yet actually they don't even know how to operate in this global economy. And that plays itself into the market. It plays itself when you see that, oh, Cyril Ramaphosa might not actually be the president, oh, let me sell the rand. But you're doing a knee-jerk reaction, you're panicking because you lack knowledge you lack an understanding of what would it really mean if Cyril Ramaphosa was not there. You don't even know who are the people who are there other than him. You only know him because he's actually in the newspapers, because we also don't read in South Africa. Let's tell the truth. You know, we hear our information gets from Anchor and Daily Maverick and Naspers, Titles, News 24. And that's all that we know. And that's where our business leaders get their information. So until you raise the standards of knowledge and people understand, and you get rid of the ignorance even amongst our own business leaders, you are going to complain about these things of, these are perceptions. People have got a confirmation bias. They'll take a decision because Trevor Manuel said something. They'll take a decision because Jacob Zuma has got 9% or 12% of the vote. But all these decisions are taken at a human level, at a subjective level.
Sure. Yeah. You know, Mr. Parks, I mean, I think there was something I think you alluded to, which was an interesting one, around, you know, singing, I guess, from the same hymn book. I mean, you didn't use those so many words, but it's really, I think, just alignment. And as you were talking, you know, I thought about China, for example, right? And so they've got these rolling 5-year investment programs, investment agenda, and each 5 years, this is what we're going to focus on, right? And when I think about then how swiftly and how able we were to rally around COVID, it was because it sounded a little bit like a 5-year agenda program, you know? We were clear around what we needed to do, and that we all needed to put our heads down and make this thing work, come hell or high water. How do we think about maybe that kind of NEDLAC-led agenda, where NEDLAC doesn't try to solve for everything? Maybe we give NEDLAC a 5-year agenda on a particular sector or particular issue, and maybe that's maybe something that could inspire a lot more harmony and a lot more alignment, insofar as then the people we bring into the room, the skills we bring into the room, as well as then, I guess, the desired strategic outcomes.
Yeah. No, thanks. I mean, I think there was that quote from Barack Obama who said, I think during his campaign, you need to learn to chew gum and walk at the same time. So we would love to just do one issue, but you know, life is a bit more complex. There'll be new legislation that comes up, et cetera, so you do have to multitask. But I think your point is right. And when we had discussions around the social compact, you know, about 2 years ago with the presidency, et cetera, and government just kept, and even I think colleagues in business, maybe we're also probably also guilty as well. Wanted to resolve everything. We said, let's just rather focus on 2 or 3 things, big, high-impact issues. So we really pushed, for example, let's fix ESCOM, because if ESCOM works, every single workplace can be productive. There's an immediate benefit to everybody. If it doesn't work, well, then there's anything's going to get done. We tried to also focus similarly on Transnet, because again, Transnet is now the next biggest crisis, etc. I think it's been a little bit of a learning curve at times, and I think the only way at times is to learn, is to make mistakes and see how do you improve, etc. But I think your point is right. COVID-19, we were able to move things very, very fast. Yeah, there was a lot of drama, there was a lot of bumps. You know, the UF, for example, was never built for shutting down an entire economy within 6 days. Going from paying 700 million rand a month to doing that in a single day. So obviously there was going to be chaos and people were going to misbehave, etc., etc. But I think your point is right. We managed to do well. If you compare us to other countries, our death rate is far less than many industrialized countries. The social leave we put out with all of its dramas, it was substantial. Again, with all the challenges. So I think for us, we should really try to see how do we revive that. Don't have to fix, like you're saying, every single thing under the sun. There are other institutions of the state, there's parliament, etc., which also play a key role. But I think for us, the number one thing is if we can just focus on unemployment. If we can resolve the crisis of unemployment, all the other issues will start to resolve themselves. If you don't resolve it, then it doesn't. And it has at times been a bit frustrating, because at times we don't always feel that all of us, including ourselves as Labour, get the extent of the unemployment crisis and how much of a ticking time bomb it is. And the July 2021 violence was a reminder, and leave aside the political and the criminal orchestration behind it, but it was a reminder how fragile a society we are. And again, look at North Africa, a small thing, and society imploded. But I think for us there is potential. There is that space. Look, it is a learning curve. You have a GNU, you have new ministers, you have ministers from new parties which have never been part of government before. So it is going to be a bit of a learning process, but we're confident we can get there. We don't have an alternative. We have to fix it. But I think last, your point is right. China is an example. You know, in the 70s, China had a famine. There was a shortage of food. People were starving to death, literally. Today, China is about to be the biggest economy in the world, and even the EU and the US go to China asking them to buy their debt. But I think your point is the right one about the efficiency of China. When China says, here's the plan, all of us, we implement it. We're not playing games. And if a minister misbehaves or steals money, well, there's a prison cell waiting for you, or a bullet, something like that. We don't have to go to that extreme. But you can see in China, I mean, and it's impressive how fast they're moving. You know, even other countries like Vietnam, etc. Just the focus on the issue, getting everybody, business, labor, society behind it, and we don't do it. Maybe my last point, then I really will shut up. We always speak about buying locally produced goods, but all of us are guilty. We don't do it. You know, but yet the economy is so diversified. We manufacture anything you'd want here: shoes, clothes, cars, food. We can even make nuclear bombs. There's nothing we can't make. We have a proudly South African campaign, but the time and again you'll find business colleagues half-hearted. Even us as Labour, we chased, you know, at one period with the Economic Recovery Plan, we chased our individual unions to say, just itemize for us your T-shirts, your little pop-up banners, your little backpacks for conferences, your cars, how many of those are locally made? It was a nightmare chasing people. So I think my point is that we need to, all of us, do much better and collectively to take ownership and responsibility. Thanks.
Sure. Yeah, and I mean, Mr. Kaza, you know, again, you know, going to a point about the importance of not finding ourselves only in a space where we mark our own exam, you know, and therefore we score ourselves and we'll never have objective basis from which to interrogate the good stuff we're doing and the bad stuff we're doing. And as I said earlier, is that a relatively underfunded commodity is research. But you also alluded to the fact that that's the one thing that also gets easily discarded, because if it doesn't suit my agenda, and then what's the point of that? And so if on the one side we have an HR issue, as Ndate Mukobi says, that we don't have enough well-versed people in the rooms that are deciding very complex issues, yet then when you do bring in specialist voices into that room, they are rejected, partially at times, depending on whatever the outcome is, right? They're banking the outcome and not the process. What's the alternative? How do we win this fight?
Yeah, no, how I wish I had an answer for that. Because you see, one thing that we are good at as South Africans is to talk. We are very good. We sit around the table. Even if we hate each other, we will talk, and we can talk the whole day and night. Still hating each other, but at the end, there will be something that will come out with that we will agree upon without fighting. Now, when I talk about the issue of, for instance, looking at circumventing some of the issues that we're confronting, you know, an example is what was being said here, that when there's a crisis, we actually act faster, quicker, and although we know that there are some other remnants that are a consequence of that fast act, you know, the issues that were actually observed during COVID or are now coming out as a consequence of this Fast Act, and because other people see opportunities when we act fast. We are very good at identifying problems. We talk about the problems even every day. It's pillars, 5 pillars, and under development, unemployment, and we even say the words that were being said even here by the panelists here, that these things are actually a ticking time bomb. But it ends there. When we have identified that this is a ticking time bomb, and then we said, no, it becomes a rhetoric. Everybody that takes a platform, and unemployment in South Africa, 33%, when it comes to youth, 60%. It is indeed a ticking time bomb. But what do we do about it? We talk about it. We get it in every book, every paper, everyone writes about it. But then we do nothing about it. Now, those issues that we identify as being issues that can turn the country upside down, maybe at some stage we need to just say what Matthew was saying, just a few of them, rather than taking all of them. Just take a few to say, if we say unemployment is a ticking time bomb, then we do nothing about it. But let's take it and let's do it in a manner that we dealt with COVID. Let's make it a crisis. So if we only act actively in crisis, then let's say everything is a crisis so that we can do it in a crisis manner. Well, we always mention the Chinese. One thing that is good, I saw now that there's agreements that will now manufacture things and send to China. And you ask yourself, do people understand? I mean, they go there, sign agreements that will manufacture things and send to China. But do people understand that Chinese manufacture things overnight? And this, that we use taxis here, there they actually load every morning. They are loading from every household in the streets. The ground floor is actually manufacturing. And therefore they are all taken to Guangzhou. And then all of us are actually flying to Guangzhou to take those things to South Africa and sell them. So I'm just saying that when you sometimes sign agreements, are you realistic about certain things that you say sometimes? Because you must be able to say realistically what needs to be done. And if unemployment is a crisis, what do we do about these things that we are creating by ourselves? Anything in China that becomes a crisis is actually taken on a 5-year program, and there's a year targets that are being put. Yeah, if there's a shortage of food, they will say no. We all go and cut those, and everybody go to the fields. Make sure that there's enough food. There's this, there's that. Which food they actually even brings here and actually distributes even amongst us here. But all I'm saying is that if we only act when there's a crisis, let's identify those crises and convert them into crises indeed and act accordingly.
Sure, and this was a perfect segue to our government representative. He said it's government for all of us, and and he was also the one who said, we respond well in crisis mode, etc. And so I think this is a perfect, and I think I'm going to give you the toughest question before we go to the floor. We've spoken enough about NEDLAC. Maybe even more specifically in your capacity from the DTIC, not even just as government. What's the one crisis do you identify from NEDLAC? One. And what could you as DDI do tomorrow to put that crisis into effect and mobilize something going forward? Just one.
No, just one. No, I think is the turnaround time maybe. I'll give you an example. At I think 2009, immediately after a financial crisis, there was a lot of accords that were signed by government, labor and business. Youth Employment Accord, localization accord and things like that. So those things becomes papers, and everyone signs, the signatures there, everyone signed. But the implementation part then becomes government's problem. Because government can report, but when you start approaching a business, this is where the difficulty is that, no, we're still consulting internally, we're representing bigger. So there are those things that you might say government has its own processes are long and things like, but you're starting to hear that when you get a NEDLAC, any business must still go and consult, and they take quite a bit of time to come back to you. By that time, it's 5 years later. So I think that the turnaround time from everybody else, I think that can actually help. But of course, other things you really need to go deep into it to understand what is it for labor, what is it for the community when you do some of those things. But I think some of the discussions tend to take too long because we disagree on national minimum wage, even though we know it's important, to take people out of poverty. But there's a pushback, and I think for us, it's the government only responsible for 10 to 50% of the economy, even employment, right? So we really need private sector. We can do everything that we need to do as government. I think it's something that we always say. But unfortunately, you need the other part, 80% of the economy, to also move so that we can take people out of poverty. Of course, there are things that we believe we can do, but if we can be told some of those things. There's a GNU now, we're busy with the process of midterm development plan. We moved away from the midterm strategy framework. So we're taking all the good things that our political parties have said, we're putting them into plans. We're working. We're hoping through that, because there's been engagement with business and labor, we hope something's going to come out of that, because we don't have lack of time anymore. Because 2030 here, NDP said we should be halving unemployment to 6%. It should be heavy. So that issues that growth should be growing by 5.4%. So one of the things that we've been doing, that the ministers are sending us back to say, but you are not ambitious enough. So the president has already sent the DGs back to say, you are not ambitious enough in what you actually do. There's a expectation to go meet industry, labor. We want to see those plans that you have in industry and labor into to make it a program of government. So yeah, maybe a turnaround time, that's something that I think we need to work on.
Thank you, sir. I think, we are definitely going to give them a round of applause after the questions are coming, but I think just the initial responses definitely deserve a round of applause. Dr. Mtimka, can I ask you to join so that as then also questions emerge from your emergent, that you can certainly join the panel. Like I said earlier on, so we're going to have one roving mic. We'll take a round of questions, and once we're done, we'll, I guess, if you do have an individual on the panel that you'd like to address the question to, please do so. If not, you can ask it generally, and I'm sure one of the panel members will know which one to take. We'll take a couple of questions, we'll give them an opportunity to respond. So if you may put up your hands if you do have a question. We do have a gentleman in the, okay, maybe closest to the mic, and then we'll come to you, sir, in the front here.
Is it on? Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Debele from SAPI Manufacturing, and before this I was with Business Leadership South Africa. So what I want to know is, are NEDLAC senior leadership in the room, and what are the next steps after today's engagement? How do we make sure that it's not a conversation for the sake of conversation, and the actual change that is needed within the NEDLAC engagement structure is then driven forward? Thanks.
Thank you. There was a hand here, and then there are two ladies on the right-hand side as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much. The name is Tebogo Mwalusi from Rise Mzansi. I think the first thing is just to Mr. Xoli, thank you for the session, but I also think we definitely need to make sure that gender representation is acknowledged in our panels. I think it's an important part of making sure we succeed in our endeavors. So I think just an observation, notwithstanding that the guests were fantastic, it's got, not to do with you, but just as it's important that that voice becomes part of the room. Doc, you mentioned a recommendation around kind of collaborative engagement being one of the ways to deal with the challenges. I'm interested to get your view in the sense that we are moving into the next electoral cycle, and the GNU at the moment seems to work because there is space for what you would call collaborative politics. But once you get into electoral cycles, you almost have an emerging culture of competitiveness and that adversarial nature. How can you have those two coexist, knowing that we move from election cycle to election cycle? The second one is just around, NEDLAC has got some key performance indicators, and Chair, through you'll allocate, or whoever can speak to them. But the 5 that I've identified is economic growth, employment trends, social impact, policy influence, and stakeholder engagement. Across those key performance indicators, NEDLAC has underperformed, at least from where I look at it, and what the report suggests. And relevance is about impact and contribution and value. And I don't see consequence management in how you hold NEDLAC accountable to those KPIs when they fail to perform. So how do we hope that they will grow, succeed, be impactful, when by their own standards they've been a failure and there isn't an instrument to hold them to account? So that's a reflection. The 4 key partners within NEDLAC are all in their individual sectors, quite diverse and to an extent competing amongst each other. Labor competes. Mr. Vavi was supposed to be here, but he also represents a part of the organized labor movement that's not part of COSATU. And they're all fighting for the space of organized labor. Even organized business by its very nature is not as homogenous as people think it is. You can have in the room BUSA, BLSA, BBC, and the like, but they will have interesting and diverging views on certain aspects of policy and resourcing. So I think if you have diverging interests within the stakeholders themselves, it makes consolidation at a NEDLAC level increasingly difficult. Without vision and proper leadership and an incentive to collaborate, I'm not sure how you achieve that outcome. The last one, Chair, is I think NEDLAC is missing a massive opportunity. We are at the precipice of having to redesign the political economy in South Africa, which is the basis of the future of how we're going to be working as part of these 4 stakeholders. We're supposed to be having a national dialogue, of which NEDLAC should be a fundamental driver and champion of that space, because NEDLAC by its very essence is the microcosm that explains the different views of what society is supposed to be. Where is NEDLAC in advancing and driving and championing that national dialogue and being one of the leaders in making sure that it happens, but that it has the convening power to create that legitimacy to have those conversations and then drive some of these indicators that we spoke about? Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. My name is Gunondembe Kokaluzipo, the Deputy General Secretary of SAFTU. The brother next to me, he has read my mind, but I don't know how, because we're not even sitting next to each other. Because firstly, I felt a bit uncomfortable when I checked the program and I picked up that no one even realized that you couldn't pick up any, not to say that the presentations were not happy with, but at least to understand the crisis we are faced with in terms of gender parity. Wherever we go, we feel so much uncomfortable, some of us, to come to such events. But mine will not be more of questions, but maybe to echo more. My last question maybe will go to Umkayawam. Dr. Mtimka. I will reserve the question for you at last. But I want to agree that, one, we need to understand that NEDLAC is a contested space. That one, I think we all agree that it is a contested space. However, though it is a contested space, but there's one person who's responsible to make sure that there will be policies that we need to agree and there should be implementation. But that will be the government. But I want us to understand that, one, we have to agree that there is an undermining of NEDLAC. The undermining of NEDLAC, I don't know how many times we will need ministers to come, and we will have to postpone because ministers are not available. The very important minister that should be the first minister who had to meet with us, I don't know how many times, Comrade Matthew Parks will agree with me. We had to postpone, I think, 2 or 3 meetings to meet with the minister who is assigned with NEDLAC, which is the Minister of Labour. So you can see that it does not seem as an institution which is fit for purpose for the policies and implementation in assisting the process of the government. That's another challenge. The other one will be, I wouldn't agree more with the gentleman next to Dr. Mtimka, the mismatch of skills, despite the fact that as a country, we are a good country, but we're a good country because the paper accepts anything that is written on it. You can write my name, the paper will accept whatever you write. You can insult me on the paper will still accept what you wrote on the paper. But the problem, again, we are a country that has a problem of implementation. We've got a serious crisis of the mismatch of skills. And when we've got a mismatch of skills, you will understand that how many sitters we have as a country. You've got a bank sitter in the banking institution, you've got a teacher sitter in the transport, you've got so many sitters. In fact, all sectors, they are represented by sitters, but we're still a country that struggles with mismatch of skills. You look at the frustration of the fourth IR. We have not implemented, we have moved now, we are on the artificial intelligence, and you realize that it looks like we take time to move and realize that the world is moving. By the time we want to deal with the fourth IR, we will be overtaken by something else. So it's a serious challenge, and we don't know. That's why then I said, now coming to my question to Dr. Mtimka, to say, maybe are we not a country that has got a very serious crisis of accountability and responsibility? And when we've got that crisis, it has taken us so much crime rate, but it's just simple accountability and responsibility. It has taken us so much unemployment. It has taken us so much poverty and inequalities. Are we not a country that has got just that simple crisis of accountability? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sisi. There's a question to the lady on the middle back right.
Thank you. I'm Kubeshni Gamada-Jones. I'm an advisor at National Parliament. And I have a curiosity about, I think to you, Dr. Mtimka, around any findings around the voice of civil society in NEDLAC. You know, it's one of the sectors that, depending where you sit, you know, you could read an intentional or coincidental fracturing of the sector over the years. But such an important sector to our society. And I'm aware that NEDLAC as a platform works with this notion of organized. I'm curious about how they deal with the disorganized when they're important. So I guess my desire, but my plea is around understanding how and what responsibility and NEDLAC has, not just with engaging with organized civil society, however they may land, but the responsibility of how to assist a sector when it finds itself in distress. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there one more question? And I asked specifically as well, I think I do note that we have gone beyond the time that we did provide. So my thoughts is that we're only going to have one round of questions. So we'll take 2 more questions, please, so that we can then allow our panelists to respond, and then we can then get to the closing. Thank you very much. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much, Program Director. My name is Sebastian Okotia. I'm from the ANC's Policy Monitoring, Evaluation and Research Unit. You'll forgive me a bit. Comrades have a tendency to preamble before questions, so I may just preamble from time to time. I think the first issue, before I even start speaking, I think there is a growing tendency over the past decade in our country that every time that we must do an assessment of an institution or a body, we jump from the negative and we never actually find ourselves getting into the positive. For me, it would make sense that after 30 years of democracy, numerous institutions within our democracy would need to be renewed. The time period and the political landscape has shifted over the past 30 years such that a consistent renewal is needed. But the need for renewal does not equalize an institution being redundant. Rather, our search for renewal is for us to ensure that these institutions become better fit for purpose. And I think one of the biggest issues which have been raised here, and one which I agree with, is that whilst the Act and also NEDLAC's constitution confers it a very wide scope in terms of its operations, I think there is a need for detailed and proper cycling within NEDLAC that works in conjunction with our administrative terms and governance, but that also looks and focuses at what are government's priorities. Because when the DTIC speaks about the question of a time gap, in an administration where the focus is unemployment, inclusive growth, ethical development of the state, there are certain policy bills that would take preference. And it is important that we get into the habit of working in order to create that alignment. That is my first issue. The good doctor raises a very interesting issue in terms of social compacting in South Africa, and he coins it the adversarial versus the collaborative. It is our considered take that we have a crisis of collaborative leadership in South Africa. And over the past couple of years, if we have looked at how local government has been shaped by the political dynamics, we'll begin to concede that we have not arrived at a place where we have created a culture of collaborative governance or collaborative leadership. Now, in order for that to happen, I would ask, what do we need to do at a grassroots level? Because the problem that NEDLAC has is not a problem which is unique to NEDLAC. It occurs even at the level of in a ward, when there are issues in a ward. There is a project which is happening in the ward. You will have labor having its particular view. You will have government with its view. You'll have business with its view. And there are a lot of projects across the country that have been stopped because we can't find a level of collaboration. And for me, I think the good doctor, if we could be advised on new strategies from the ground up, how we begin to infuse collaborative leadership. My last one, my leader, please, is the question around the bypassing of NEDLAC partners. You see, I think wherever a shortcut is an option, human nature pushes us towards taking the shortcut. Most of the panelists have agreed that the NEDLAC process is a very thorough but a very slow process. And often these bilateral agreements which happen are in order to shorten the time period. But these bilateral agreements also lead into eventualities at the end. Even in terms of a public participation process, Comrade MC, you will note that in a public participation process on a bill, structures that sit in NEDLAC that are commenting currently now on a bill, you can find them submitting their own thing on the side, proposing their own thing on the side when they see that the SIP is shrinking within the social compacting. And I think we need to review the regulations of how do we regulate the actions of these people who are sitting here. Because, for example, if Busa is dissatisfied, there's nothing in a democracy that prevents them from going their own way to negotiate their own preferred outcome to a certain thing. And I think if we can maybe just zoom in on these three issues, I think it can bring us better clarity. But I do think also that NEDLAC has played a pivotal role in South Africa over the past 30 years. And the need for renewal of NEDLAC strategy, NEDLAC's operations, should not negate the good work that has been done. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Was that the last question? Oh, okay, one more.
Yes, thanks, Program Director. My name is John Magoro, an independent consultant. I will be brief. I initially wanted to ask questions, but I think a lot of questions were asked. So I just want to make a brief comment, in terms of what NEDLAC should consider, going forward to remain relevant. I think we all know that policy making in our country, it takes time. It's a lengthy process and it's complex because of their vested interest and so forth. But I thought of it would be good to kind of also don't take it for granted that everyone in government understand or appreciates the role of NEDLAC. So I think all constituencies have a role to play, particularly from government side, to educate policymakers about the role of NEDLAC. And the same goes to NEDLAC as well, NEDLAC management, to also do sort of capacity building and awareness about NEDLAC. Another area of importance is, how NEDLAC should be synchronized or aligned with Parliament. I think it's another area that has to be, looked at, because it should not be like a duplication. As we know, policy making is a process. So therefore, various individuals at a particular point make input. So there must be that alignment between NEDLAC and Parliament. And then lastly, we know that there is the issue of evidence, making sure that our policies are evidence-based. How about, you've got a tool already in government that is called CS, which is more like, your regulatory impact assessment. How about ensuring that NEDLAC gets involved during initial stages of finalizing NEDLAC, finalizing the CS report, to make sure that you shorten the time of engagements? I don't think it's necessary that NEDLAC has to do line by line on legislative clauses, because that itself takes quite some time. But also, lastly, just to say that I don't know whether it came out, Doctor, in your research, how NEDLAC as an institution, entity, is capacitated, especially from human capital point of view, because it's also important for them to be able to do monitoring or policy monitoring. They need to have that capacity, and as well as being able to use available technical tools. So if that is not in place, they may not be able to fulfill their responsibility adequately. Thanks, Program Director.
Thank you very much, sir. And I think that certainly closes the round of questions. And before I go to the panelists, I think there are certainly a number of things I think Mr. Tsoi will also address. Points from you, Sir Tebogo, and now Mrs. Nontembeko, around representation. I think Frontline is definitely a learning organization. I think they've taken the feedback, and I'm sure, I think they will respond to that pressure point, I think it is an issue, and I think they've heard you. So thank you for that input. My colleague lady on the left, I'm sorry I did not get your name. I think you said from NAMPAC, ne? SAPI, sorry, my apologies. There was a preamble earlier around the question you asked about NEDLAC's representation here in the room. I think once we've kind of disintegrated when we're having coffees, I think Mr. Koy is there at the back. I think he can, I guess, rehash, but in essence that they aren't here today in representation. They did have their own event, and in essence this, from their perspective, was not a NEDLAC sanctioned event, and so that's why they're not in representation. I think, if I may ask my panelists this way, I think there are a number of questions that, of course, have moved many juices inside you. Doug, I think we'll just start with you, but answer and close. And then I think we'll do the same, is that where there's a relevant question, please just answer and then just closing remarks. Also then, of course, recognizing that we are a little bit behind time, so if I may ask you to be as succinct as possible, just to make sure that then we can leave just enough space to close the event. Thank you, sir.
Thank you for the questions. I think the first one is for the Spatamantlas, and I'm happy with how you've outlined how it's going to be answered. The what's next question. Obviously, the coverage, there's a lot of coverage from this event. It's going to be a trigger point again for a discussion, and I think that will be a good start. Teboho, so I was shy about this part in the presentation, about how you actually do collaboration. Shy because, you see, when we talk about big things, and grand, major things that need to be done, we generally they are self-gratifying. So, for example, if we say expropriate land, ne? That's self-gratifying because it's one big activity that you can do at once, and everybody feels, wow, our anger has found expression. Now the things of building, that's the more mundane, granular, day-to-day, not radical things. So, for example, in the presentation, I thought I'm not even going to touch on it because it talks about attitudinal issues, such as eliminating a competitive spirit, such as nation building, a commitment to South Africa as a grand idea, you know, and it appeals to what people call, I mean, rainbowism is a concept of attempting to refashion how people think and feel about citizenship and therefore commitment to the country. So it takes those small granular things, you know, in order to make collaboration work. And in fact, I'll tie it into the question Kai. So what we, and now this is now forcing me to butterfly. I've been saying, and this is what environmentalists say, think global, act local. There is no other way you achieve sustainable change except by creating space for more people to do the right thing. So accountability and responsibility becomes that. Now, I'll quickly talk about how our political system is designed to escape accountability. How do people acquire office in the political office? To acquire political office in South Africa, one of the things you don't need is to be best among a group of people. Why? Because how you say, let's say we are in this room, right? How you secure that this room votes for you is not by presenting the most compelling value proposition. How does it work? because it's yourselves who are the biggest culprit of this. All that it takes, all that it takes is for people to collude about how to set the meeting such that the people who are not going to vote for me are not going to be there on that day that I'm voted. And then the next step is how to disqualify everybody else. So it's a process of manufacturing outcomes. You will never have accountable leadership as long as you permit processes of acquiring office at the level of the party and then the state through these mechanisms. It's not going to happen. That's why it's not important, and sorry I'm picking on the ANC because that's the biggest party. It's been the governing party. That is why you would have the best performing MEC who is not aligned to the group that wins a conference. They get fired. They get fired in my province. They get fired elsewhere. So it's a big problem. So accountability is going to come once we emphasize and we are jealous about performance and secure democratic processes. Insulate them from manipulation. If we do that, then everybody knows that I cannot manipulate my way to the top. So yes, this is me agreeing that we do have a problem of accountability and responsibility. It's not just the politicians. Read the PwC economic crimes report. You know that our corporates are number 3, are not lower than number 5 when it comes to the most notorious for cutting corners. Even if we have one of the best accounting professions in the world, we have here in South Africa, in fact, Symposia Blanche, I was warned not to do, Symposia Blanche writes an economic history of South Africa, right? And he says, one of the things that corporate South Africa has been known for is a propensity for myth-making. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
The rest of the questions will be answered by others. Yeah. So around the civil society, Kubeshni, I have to squeeze this one in, please. The civil society, the civil society representation did come up, and the issue there was exactly as you point out, how seemingly it's disjointed sector, and so the voice is not, the feeling is that the voice of civil society is underrepresented. Thank you. And we were hearing, in the bilaterals, that civil society is not counted among those who are bypassing NEDLAC. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
I think that was a question of performance. One of the things that we conscious of is that NEDLAC is not in itself a policy formulation. It's not supposed to form policy, it's supposed to implement and cooperate with whoever of the partners. And in particular, it's government that tends to bring. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
It's government that tends to bring quite a number of the policies to do with those 4 elements: economic, public management and policy, whatever the case might be, industrial policy. So what tends to happen is that to the extent that there is no agreement, even though we strive for consensus, just because there is no consensus does not mean the government is not going to go and implement the policy that they prefer. It's happened recently with NHI, it's happened again, COSATU and Big Labour pushed that more than anyone else because they were the sponsors, but business didn't like certain elements of it, but they lost that particular fight, and that's why there are all these threats of litigation that are spewing about all over. The bail appeal was also one of those. So business does not have to agree, Labour does not have to agree, as long as the requirement is that as long as you did bring the matter for discussion, you did consider the views that we gave to you as the mover, the sponsor of that particular issue, and that is all that we can actually hope for. However, we found that most of the partners tend to be very reasonable in terms of discussing each and every issue that has been put forward. We've never had, at least as business, even though we disagree sharply, but we've never had an incident where government simply refused to discuss issues or Big Labour simply refused to discuss issues. We found that people are open-minded, but where we disagree, we just disagree. That's all there is to it.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. So look, you know, I mean, for us as Labour, NEDLAC is a key platform. It's a place where we can raise issues, try to resolve them. And I think we strongly believe in a social compact because it benefits workers, but also government on its own can't resolve all of our problems as a country. Business too can't resolve them. It really requires all of us to put something on the table. We don't always get everything we want, and that's the nature of democracy, etc. We've spent a lot of effort as Labour, as COSATU, trying to rebuild it over the past 5, 6, 7 years. And I think with some successes, I can tell Jan at least that NEDLAC, it meets virtually these days. So the torture before flying to Joburg for meetings every week, that's finished. And the benefit of that virtual thing is you can be much more productive at a fraction of the cost. During COVID, it was insane. We were meeting about 10 times a day on the UAF issues, on the vaccination, the health and safety issues, 7 days a week. But there was a benefit to it, and so I think that's changed for the better. But I think the critical thing is to measure what's the impact on the ground. Is it a talk shop, or does it make a material difference to somebody? We can point to a farm worker who receives 27 Rand 58 cents a rand now. We can point to a domestic worker who is now covered by injury on duty insurance. We can point to restaurant workers who receive money during COVID. We can point to the mining industry where 99% of the workers vaccinated during COVID. And all of these have issues, it's fine, but there's material benefits. We can point to an SOD grant today, which lays a foundation for a basic income grant. And again, all these have issues. ESCOM, the debt relief package, the two-part reform. We spent a lot of time, I think it was last year, I don't know, or this year, I forget which, must be last year. So before the public procurement bill came to Parliament, we had a lot of discussions around how to enhance it, to do the issue of corruption, how to use it to support locally produced goods, etc., streamline it across government. And we all benefit from it because we could hear from business what are the practical challenges, we could hear from the government, could hear from Labour, etc. But the benefit to parliamentarians was that at least a lot of those issues were resolved in NEDLAC before it came to Parliament, because Parliament's a very different creature, Matthew will tell you. You don't have the same format as NEDLAC where you can sit for 6 weeks or 6 months line by line. Parliament, it's much more pressured, it's got its own type of chaos. But there's benefit. And look, there is competition amongst Labour, but like I say, most issues there's consensus on 90% of issues, whether we're COSATU on this side or SAFTU there or Solidarity there. Most issues we would find each other agreeing. We've raised the issue of the national dialogue, and we've made the same point that NEDLAC should play a key anchor role to help facilitate. Lastly, Chair, look, the availability depends. You get some ministers who really make an effort to come to NEDLAC. Others, you have to chase them. The president himself has made a huge amount of time availing himself at NEDLAC, so it depends on the individual. But I think lastly, Chair, look, there is a need for NEDLAC. There's a value for social compact, and I guess when you have a GNU, uncharted territories, the value will become even greater. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you kindly. Go for it, sir.
Thanks, Chair. I'll be very quick because most issues have been covered. One issue that was raised is about the NEDLAC engaging civil society. There's something that is very important, is what was said by the comrade from the ANC, that after 30 years of democracy, we might need to review these institutions. I remember very well, for instance, the Auditor General, the powers that were enhanced in terms of the work that it's doing. I mean, NEDLAC would have to be enhanced in terms of the work that it's doing. You get what I mean? Because it's hamstrung. And now the question becomes, who's gonna, because the parliamentarians might not be interested in this. 90% of the parliamentarians that are there now don't even know about NEDLAC. But they're in parliament. They are going to be making laws. And they were born, some of them just during that time of democracy. All they know is democracy. So I'm just saying that the big question becomes, who's going to review these things? Because NEDLAC does need reviewer, because it is hamstrung in doing certain things. We are talking about monitoring evaluation. It can't do it, because that's not what it was meant to do. So the laws that were actually formulated NEDLAC are not meant to do that. But don't we want NEDLAC to be at least a voice that can actually make sure that some of the issues it follows up? Some of the people that are running away from NEDLAC, don't we want them to be actually forced to come to NEDLAC? I'm just saying, yes, I agree that renewal is needed, but somebody must initiate it.
Thank you kindly, sir. Hey, all of you are winning now under 2 minutes. Hey, Doc, can you see you academics say, when our government don't disappoint. Let's go.
I see what you did there. Yeah. For government does value NEDLAC. I think that's something that we have picked up. Without NEDLAC, we can't function. There are certain things that were actually initiated at NEDLAC level, particularly by labor, as Matthew was saying. Two-post system, we never even thought about it, but it's something initiative that came from NEDLAC. Public procurement, we in government, that's another thing that we need to know. Sometimes we don't agree. We miles apart because we represent different interests as well. Hemp and cannabis, you'll hear, it's going to come very soon. So it helps sometimes to have, even though I'm from government, it helps to have a business and labor and civil society supporting one government, but even though we have to be together. So there's some of those things that we can't raise maybe internally. We believe that with the support of labor and business and civil society, we can actually get things moving in government. So yeah, maybe let me stop there. But on terms of the representation, I might say that initially the invitation went to my DG, who's a female. Unfortunately, she could not be here. So maybe they are forgiven in that space because I suspect that the DG, I think she cancelled last minute because she had to go somewhere with minister who's traveling. So apologies for that. It's something that we'll have, maybe if we knew, we'll have asked one of us to actually come. Thanks.
Hey, 20 seconds before, well done, sir. I think we need to give them a round of applause. Thank you very much. And I think on that note, Mr. Toy, I'd like to invite you then for closing remarks, and then I'm sure everyone's looking forward to a bev or two.
Thank you, Program Chair. I almost came running here because I realized that the room is thinning out steadily. But I was going to thank people individually, but let me not do that because I'm conscious of time. But thank you all for taking the time to come and be with us this afternoon. I think we've had a very engaging discussion. And let me make one apology without excuses, without any reservations. And that comes from you, Mr. Molusi and DS. We really do apologize for the makeup of this event. I'm not going to offer any excuses. We will absolutely do better next time. There is absolutely no way we could excuse the face that we have presented at this event today. And lastly, just to say for those who are still around, we do have a few nibbles and some drinks that we'll be serving there at the balcony. So please, if you are not pressed for time, do stick around for a drink or three. And just a way of saying thank you to you and for the panelists. There's a lady here called Dudu. She's there at the back. Again, in the interest of time, she will present you with our thank you gifts for taking the time to be with us. And with those few remarks, Program Chair, thank you to you, sir, for facilitating this conversation so wonderfully. I think your interventions and the way that you led our panelists and the floor through what can be a very dense subject, I think is really, really worth taking note of. And if I may just ask if you just give him a round of applause, please. I think it's been truly outstanding. And with those words, again, I'll thank you individually. I don't want to hold up people. Thank you so much to all of you.